The U's Liberty moved through the dark space between stars like a silver needle threading through black cloth. Ambassador Jake Morrison stood at the large window in his cabin, watching distant suns shine like tiny diamonds. He had made this trip many times before, but something felt different today. The ship was heading to Nexus Prime Station for trade talks with the Zephyrian Galactic Empire. Just like always, but Jake could not shake the feeling that this time would change everything. Jake was a tall man with gray hair and kind eyes that had seen too much of the galaxy's harsh realities. He had been Earth's top diplomat for 15 years, and he knew how to read people and situations. The Zephyrians controlled most of the known galaxy, and they were not gentle rulers. But Earth needed their trade agreements to survive and grow. It was a delicate balance that Jake had to maintain. Down in the communications room, Lisa Grant sat at her station with headphones on, listening to the endless chatter of space traffic. She was young and smart, with red hair and sharp green eyes that missed nothing. Lisa had been monitoring alien broadcasts for 3 years, and she knew the patterns of normal communication. Today, something was wrong. A new signal appeared on her screen, different from the usual merchant chatter and navigation updates. It was heavily encrypted and coming from deep inside Empire space. Lisa's fingers moved quickly over her controls, trying to break through the security layers. The signal was not meant for human ears, that much was clear. After an hour of work, Lisa finally cracked the encryption. What she saw on her screen made her blood run cold. It was a video transmission from Emperor Vexhai himself, being sent to his military commanders across the galaxy. Lisa quickly called Jake to the communications room. Jake arrived within minutes, followed by Security Chief Roy Palmer and the ship's doctor, Carl Wright. Roy was a big man with scars on his hands from old battles. He had fought in the border wars before becoming a security officer. Carl was older, with white hair and gentle hands that had saved many lives. All 3 men looked at Lisa's screen with growing horror. The video showed a massive arena on some distant world. Thousands of creatures from different species were lined, up in rows, their hands bound behind their backs. Jake recognized some of the species: Brextans with their blue skin and 4 arms, Kelari with their fur and pointed ears, humans who looked terrified and lost. All of them were prisoners, and all of them were about to die. Emperor Vexhai appeared on the screen, his reptilian form towering over the prisoners. His scales were dark green, and they changed color as his emotions shifted. 4 powerful arms gestured as he spoke to his audience of military officers. His voice was deep and cold, like winter wind through dead trees. "My loyal commanders," the Emperor said, "today we celebrate another victory for our great empire. These 50,000 criminals and rebels have been judged and found guilty of opposing our righteous rule. Their deaths will send a message to every world that dares to resist us." Jake watched in sick fascination as the Emperor continued his speech. The prisoners below looked up at the cameras with eyes full of fear and despair. Some were crying, others were trying to comfort those next to them. Children stood next to their parents, not understanding what was about to happen. "Let this broadcast reach every corner of our empire," Vexhai continued. "Let every species see what happens to those who choose rebellion over order. The galaxy belongs to the strong, and we are the strongest of all." The execution began without warning. Energy weapons fired in perfect synchronization, cutting down row after row of prisoners. The camera work was professional, showing the killings from multiple angles. It was clear that this was not just an execution. It was entertainment for the Empire's military leaders. Lisa turned away from the screen, but Jake forced himself to keep watching. He saw families die together, warriors fall with defiance in their eyes, and innocents who had probably never hurt anyone in their lives. The killing went on for 20 minutes, methodical and thorough. When it was over, 50,000 beings lay dead in the arena sand, but the broadcast was not finished. Emperor Vexhai reappeared, his scales now a satisfied golden color. He began showing recordings from other worlds, other executions. This was not a single event. It was part of a systematic campaign of terror that had been going on for months. Phase 7 of our cleansing operation is complete, the Emperor announced. Worlds in sectors 12 through 18 have been pacified. Resistance movements have been crushed. Order has been restored through strength. The video showed execution. Sites on dozens of different planets. Mining worlds where workers had asked for better conditions. Agricultural colonies that had refused to increase their food shipments. Research stations that had tried to remain neutral in the Empire's expansion. All had been punished with mass killings. Jake felt sick to his stomach, but he also felt something else, a burning anger that started in his chest and spread through his whole body. These were not military targets or dangerous criminals. These were ordinary people who had simply wanted to live their lives in peace. Roy Palmer reached over and turned off the screen. "Sir, we should delete this transmission and pretend we never saw it," he said quietly. "If the Empire knows we intercepted their military communications, they could cancel our trade agreements. Earth needs those agreements to survive." Carl Wright nodded slowly. "Roy's right, Jake. We're diplomats, not soldiers. Our job is to keep the peace between Earth and the Empire, not to get involved in their internal affairs." Lisa looked at both men with disgust. "Internal affairs?" she said, her voice rising. "They just murdered 50,000 innocent people and broadcast it like a sports event. How is that internal?" Jake stood quietly for a long moment, thinking about what he had just seen. He thought about his daughter back on Earth, about the millions of humans living peaceful lives because of the treaties he had negotiated. He thought about the delicate balance that kept Earth safe from the Empire's overwhelming military power. But he also thought about the children in that arena, about the families who had died holding hands, about the look of hopeless terror in their eyes. He thought about the other worlds that were probably being targeted right now, about the executions that would happen tomorrow and the day after that. "Change course," Jake said finally. "Sir?" asked the ship's pilot over the intercom. "Aye," said change course. "Set a new destination for Zephyr Prime, the Empire's capital world." Roy Palmer stepped forward, his face concerned. "Ambassador, that's not on our schedule. Trade negotiations are at Nexus Prime Station, not at the capital. If we show up unannounced at Zephyr Prime, they might see it as a threat." Jake turned to face his security chief. "Good," he said. Maybe it's time they felt threatened for once. Lisa smiled for the first time since discovering the broadcast. Carl Wright looked worried, but nodded his agreement. Roy Palmer sighed and began making preparations for what he knew would be a dangerous mission. As the U.E.'s Liberty changed course toward the heart of the Zephyrian Empire, Jake stood again at his cabin window. The stars looked the same as before, but everything else had changed. He was no longer just a diplomat trying to maintain peace. He was now a man who had seen evil and decided to do something about it. The Empire had made their broadcast to terrorize the galaxy into submission. Instead, they had just awakened something in humanity that they did not understand: the refusal to stay silent in the face of injustice. The U's Liberty dropped out of hyperspace near Zephyr Prime, and Jake Morrison felt his breath catch in his throat. The Empire's capital world hung before them like a dark jewel, surrounded by the largest fleet of warships he had ever seen. Hundreds of massive vessels moved in perfect formation around the planet, their weapons pointed outward toward any possible threat. Lisa Grant's voice came over the intercom, tight with worry. "Ambassador, we're being scanned by at least 50 different ships. They're demanding to know why we're here without permission. Jake straightened his diplomatic uniform and walked to the bridge. Through the main view screen, he could see the Empire's warships moving closer to their small vessel. Each ship was 10 times larger than the Liberty, bristling with energy cannons and missile launchers. The message was clear. One wrong move, and they would be destroyed instantly. "Open a channel to the Imperial Fleet Command," Jake ordered. A few seconds later, the screen filled with the image of a Zephyrian naval officer. His scales were dark blue with silver markings that showed his high rank. His forearms moved in, a formal gestures of Imperial protocol as he spoke. "Human vessel, you are in restricted space without proper clearance. State your business immediately or prepare to be destroyed." Jake stepped forward, keeping his voice calm and diplomatic. "I am Ambassador Jake Morrison of Earth, requesting an immediate audience with Emperor Vex High. I have urgent business that cannot wait for normal scheduling." The naval officer's scales shifted to a surprised yellow color. "No species requests. Unscheduled meetings with the Emperor. Such presumption could be considered an act of war. Then perhaps you should ask the Emperor if he wants to risk war with Earth over a simple diplomatic meeting," Jake replied, letting just a hint of steel enter his voice. His screen went dark as the officer cut the connection. For 10 long minutes, the Liberty waited in space while surrounded by the Empire's most powerful warships. Jake could feel the tension on his bridge crew, but he kept his expression calm and confident. Finally, the screen activated again. This time, it showed a different officer, one with even higher rank markings. "Ambassador Morrison, Emperor Vex High, will grant you an audience. You may bring 2 companions. Any attempt at deception or violence will result in the immediate destruction of your ship and your homeworld." Jake nodded formally. "I understand the terms and accept them." An hour later, Jake stood in the Imperial Palace's main hall with his 2 chosen companions, Alex Turner, his diplomatic aide, and Amy Rodriguez, the team's translator. Alex was young but smart, with brown hair and eyes that missed nothing. Amy was older, with black hair and the patient manner of someone who had spent years learning alien languages. The Imperial Palace was designed to intimidate visitors. Ceilings soared hundreds of feet above their heads, covered with murals showing the Empire's conquest of different worlds. The walls were lined with trophy cases containing artifacts from destroyed civilizations, weapons, art, and what looked like skulls from dozens of different species. Zephyrian guards stood at attention along their path, each one carrying energy, weapons, and wearing armor that could probably stop a tank round. Their scales were dark red, marking them as members of the Imperial Guard, the Emperor's personal soldiers. They were kept waiting for 3 hours in a side chamber. Jake knew this was intentional, a way to show them how unimportant they were compared to the Emperor's other business. He used the time to study the room's decorations, trying to understand the Empire's mindset. One wall showed a massive painting of Emperor Vex High, standing over the bodies of defeated enemies. Another displayed weapons from conquered worlds, arranged like hunting trophies. The message was clear. The Empire took pride in its ability to destroy anyone who opposed it. Finally, they were led into the Emperor's throne room. The chamber was even larger than the main hall, with a throne made from some kind of black stone that seemed to absorb light. Energy fields crackled around the throne, creating patterns that hurt to look at directly. Emperor Vex High sat on his throne like a reptilian god, his massive form radiating power and menace. He was even larger than he had appeared in the broadcast, standing at least 9 feet tall with scales that shifted from dark green to gold as his mood changed. His 4 arms ended in claws that looked sharp enough to cut through steel. "So," the Emperor said, his voice echoing through the chamber like distant thunder, "the young species dares to approach me without invitation. Tell me, little human, What could be so important that you risked death to speak of it? Jake stepped forward, keeping his back straight and his voice steady. Your Majesty, I come to speak of justice and the laws that govern civilized behavior in our galaxy. The Emperor's scales shifted to an amused yellow color. Justice? Laws? These are concepts for the weak human. The strong take what they want and destroy what they cannot use. This is the natural order of the universe. Jake reached into his diplomatic case and pulled out a recording device. 3 days ago, my ship intercepted a broadcast from your military network. With your permission, I would like to show you what we saw. HFY gestured with one of his upper arms. Proceed. I am curious to see what has brought you so far from home. The recording device projected the execution footage into the air above. Jake watched the Emperor's face carefully as the images played. He saw no shame, no regret, not even surprise. Instead, HFY seemed pleased that humans had witnessed his power. When the recording ended, Jake spoke again. Your Majesty, under the Galactic Accords that your Empire signed 200 years ago, the mass execution of prisoners without trial is considered a crime against sentient life. I formally request that you submit to investigation by the Galactic Justice Council. The throne room fell completely silent. Even the guards seemed shocked by Jake's words. No one had ever challenged the Emperor's actions so directly, especially not a representative from a species as young and weak as humanity. Emperor HFY began to laugh, a sound like rocks grinding together. His scales turned bright gold with amusement. You want me to submit to investigation? You want me to answer to some council of weaklings who hide behind their laws because they lack the strength to enforce their will? The Emperor stood up from his throne, his full height making him look like a giant monster from humanity's worst nightmares. Let me explain something to you, little diplomat. Those executions were perfectly legal under imperial law. Those prisoners were rebels and criminals who threatened the peace and order of my empire. Their deaths serve as an example to others who might consider similar foolishness. Jake felt his heart pounding, but he kept his voice calm. The Galactic Accords supersede local laws when it comes to crimes against sentient beings. You signed those accords, Your Majesty. Your word binds your empire to follow them. My word binds me to nothing. HFY snarled, his scales turning deep red with anger. The Galactic Accords exist only because I allow them to exist. If I chose to withdraw from them tomorrow, who would stop me? You? Your pathetic little planet with its handful of ships? The Emperor began to pace around his throne, his claws clicking on the stone floor. But perhaps this confrontation serves a purpose. For months, I have been curious about your species. You appeared in our galaxy recently, yet you have advanced. Quickly, you have technology that interests us, resources that we could use. Most importantly, you have shown a disturbing tendency to inspire other species with talk of freedom and rights. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. This conversation was revealing more than he had expected. So I devised a test, the Emperor continued. I made sure that broadcast would reach your ship. I wanted to see what humanity would do when faced with the reality of imperial power. Would you be wise like the Nexari, who saw our strength and chose to serve us faithfully? Would you be clever like the Zeltans, who pretend not to see our actions in exchange for favorable trade agreements? The Emperor stopped pacing and stared directly at Jake. Or would you be foolish like the Vrextans, who spoke of justice and freedom until we crushed their homeworld and scattered their survivors across the galaxy as slaves? Jake felt his hands trembling with anger, but he forced himself to remain calm. And what did you learn from your test, Your Majesty? I learned that humans are even more foolish than I expected, HFY replied. You had a choice, Ambassador Morrison. You could have deleted that recording and continued with your profitable trade agreements. Instead, you chose to come here and lecture me about laws and justice." The Emperor sat back down on his throne, his scales returning to their normal green color. "But I am not unreasonable. I will give you a new choice. Return to your ship, forget what you have seen, and I will offer Earth a new trade agreement, one that will make your planet incredibly wealthy. Your people will never want for anything again." Jake looked at Alex and Amy, seeing his own thoughts reflected in their faces. This was the moment that would define not just their mission, but humanity's place in the galaxy. "And if I refuse?" Jake asked. The Emperor's scales turned black as deep space. "Then you will learn why no species has ever successfully opposed the Zephyrian Empire and survived to tell about it." Jake Morrison stood in his guest quarters on Zephyr Prime, staring out at the sprawling Imperial city below. The Emperor had given him 24 hours to consider the offer, and Jake had used the time to send an urgent message back to Earth. Now he waited for a response, while watching the alien city's strange lights flicker in patterns he did not understand. The guest quarters were luxurious by any standard, with soft furniture and advanced technology that responded to his thoughts. But Jake felt like a mouse in a trap, surrounded by luxury, while the cat decided whether to let him live or die. Imperial guards stood outside his door, polite but armed with weapons that could turn into ash in seconds. Alex Turner paced back and forth across the room, his young face tight with worry. "Ambassador, maybe we should consider the Emperor's offer. Think about what that trade agreement could mean for Earth. We could end poverty, cure diseases, explore the stars like never before." Amy Rodriguez sat quietly in a corner, her fingers moving over a translation device as she tried to decode intercepted Imperial communications. She looked up from her work with tired eyes. "Alex, did you see those recordings? 50,000 people died for no crime except wanting to live free. How many more will die while we get rich from Imperial trade?" Jake appreciated both perspectives, but his mind was already made up. He had sent Earth's leaders all the evidence they had gathered, along with his recommendation for how humanity should respond. Now he could only wait and hope that Earth's government would make the right choice. On Earth, President Helen Clark sat in the emergency session room deep beneath the Global Defense Council building. Around the table sat the most powerful people. On the planet, military leaders, scientists, economists, and diplomats who would help decide humanity's future. Helen was a small woman with silver hair and sharp blue eyes that had seen humanity through its first contact with alien life. She had been president during the negotiations that brought Earth into the galactic community, and she understood better than anyone how fragile humanity's position really was. Secretary of Defense Paul Green slammed his hand on the table, his bald head red with frustration. "We cannot afford to make an enemy of the Zephyrian Empire. They have thousands of ships, weapons that can destroy planets, and an army that has conquered most of the known galaxy. If we oppose them, they will crush us like insects." Admiral Kate Bennett leaned forward in her chair, her uniform decorated with ribbons from humanity's early space battles. She was younger than Paul, but had more actual combat experience against alien forces. "Paul, you're thinking like this is still a negotiation between human nations. This is about something bigger than trade agreements and military balance." Kate activated a holographic display showing a map of the galaxy. Red areas marked territories under Imperial control, while small blue dots showed independent worlds and resistance movements. "Our intelligence suggests that dozens of species are organizing underground resistance networks. They're waiting for someone to take the first stand against Imperial tyranny." Dr. Helen Parker, the Council's chief xenobiologist, nodded in agreement. Kate had been studying alien cultures for 20 years, and her insights had helped humanity avoid several diplomatic disasters. "Kate's right. We've been monitoring communications from resistance groups across the galaxy. They see humanity as different from other species, younger, more idealistic, but also more willing to fight for principles rather than just survival. Economic advisor Jim Watson shook his head pessimistically. Fighting for principles is a luxury we can't afford. Earth's economy depends on imperial trade routes. Our colonies need imperial protection from pirates and hostile species. If we lose that support, millions of humans could die from starvation or attack. President Clark listened to the debate for 2 hours before calling for silence. She had read Jake Morrison's report 3 times, watched the execution footage until she felt sick, and consulted with experts on galactic law and military strategy. The decision she was about to make would affect every human being alive and those yet to be born. Admiral Bennett, she said finally, in your professional opinion, could humanity survive a war with the Zephyrian Empire? Kate considered the question carefully before answering. Alone? No, we would lose quickly and completely. But with allies from the resistance movements, fighting a guerrilla campaign across multiple star systems? Yes, I think we could not only survive but eventually win. What makes you so confident? Paul Green demanded. Kate smiled grimly. Because empires that rule through fear eventually face the same problem. They create more enemies than they can fight at once. The Zephyrians are spread thin across thousands of worlds, trying to control billions of subjects who hate them. If those subjects ever coordinate their rebellion, the Empire's numerical advantage disappears. Meanwhile, back on Zephyr Prime, Jake received a secret visitor in his quarters. A small alien creature appeared in his room as if from nowhere, using technology that bypassed the Imperial sensors. The being stood only 4 feet tall, with gray skin and large black eyes that seemed to see right through him. Do not be afraid, Ambassador Morrison, the creature said in perfect English. I am Zektar of the Vrextan Resistance. My people have been fighting the Empire since they destroyed our homeworld 50 years ago. Jake tried to hide his surprise. How did you get past the guards? How do you even know who I am? Zektar's mouth curved in what might have been a smile. The Resistance has supporters even within the Imperial Palace. We have been watching your species with great interest since you arrived in our galaxy. Most new species either submit immediately to Imperial power or are destroyed for resisting. Humans have done neither. The small alien activated a device that projected images into the air between them. Jake saw dozens of different worlds, all showing signs of preparation for war. Weapons being hidden, communication networks being established, supply depots being built in secret locations. For decades, resistance cells across the galaxy have been waiting for a catalyst, someone to take the first public stand against Imperial brutality. Your confrontation with Emperor Vex High has already begun to spread through underground networks. If Earth formally rejects the Emperor's offer, it could trigger the largest coordinated rebellion in galactic history. Jake felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a heavy blanket. And if we refuse to be that catalyst? If we take the trade agreement and stay silent about what we've seen? Zektar's large eyes grew sad. Then the Resistance will continue to wait, and more innocents will die in Imperial execution chambers. The Emperor's genocide campaign is expanding. Within 6 months, he plans to begin executing entire populations of rebellious worlds. Millions will die unless someone stops him. The alien began to fade as his concealment technology prepared to. Teleport him away. The choice is yours, Ambassador. But know that whatever humanity decides, the Resistance will remember. Heroes are remembered across the centuries. Cowards are forgotten before their bodies grow cold. After Zektar disappeared, Jake sat alone with his thoughts until a communication from Earth arrived. President Clark's image appeared on his screen, her face showing the strain of the decision she had just made. Jake, she said. "I've consulted with our military leaders, our scientists, and our philosophers. The debate was long and difficult, but the decision is unanimous. Humanity will not purchase prosperity with the blood of innocence." Jake felt his heart begin to race as the president continued. "You are hereby authorized to speak for all of humanity in your response to Emperor Vexhai. You have our full support, whatever the consequences. We know this decision may lead to war, but some things are more important than safety. Some principles are worth fighting for, even if the fight seems impossible to win." The president's image leaned closer to the camera. "Jake, I want you to understand something. This isn't just about those 50,000 people who died in that arena. This is about what kind of species we want to be as we take our place among the stars. Do we want to be remembered as the humans who stood up to evil when it mattered, or as the ones who looked away when they could have made a difference?" The transmission ended, leaving Jake alone with the most important decision in human history. Outside his window, the alien city continued its strange patterns of light. Unaware that everything was about to change, Jake activated his communication device and sent a message to Emperor Vexhai's court. "Your Majesty, I am ready to give you humanity's answer." Jake Morrison walked through the imperial palace corridors with steady steps, though his heart hammered against his ribs like a caged bird. Imperial guards flanked him on both sides, their red scales gleaming under the harsh artificial lights. Behind him, Alex Turner and Amy Rodriguez followed in silence, their faces pale but determined. The throne room doors opened with a sound like thunder, revealing Emperor Vexhai seated on his dark throne. Today, the Emperor wore ceremonial armor that made him look even more massive and threatening. His scales shifted from green to gold, showing his anticipation for what he clearly expected to be humanity's surrender. Standing around the throne were dozens of imperial officials and military commanders, all present to witness what they believed would be another species bowing to imperial power. Their eyes watched Jake with the cold interest of predators studying prey. "Ambassador Morrison," the Emperor's voice boomed through the chamber, "you have had time to consider my generous offer. I trust humanity has chosen wisdom over foolishness." Jake stopped in the center of the room and looked up at the massive, reptilian ruler. For a moment, he thought about all the humans back on Earth who were counting on him to keep them safe. He thought about his daughter Sarah, who was studying to become a doctor and dreamed of helping people across the galaxy. He thought about the millions of peaceful lives that might be destroyed by what he was about to do. Then he thought about the 50,000 beings who had died in that arena, about the children who had clung to their parents as the energy weapons, charged about the look of hopeless terror in their eyes. He thought about Zektar and the resistance fighters who had been waiting decades for someone to take a stand. "Your Majesty," Jake said, his voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber, "I have consulted with my government and received their instructions. Humanity's answer is no." The throne room fell silent as death. Emperor Vexhai's scales turned a shocked yellow color, as if he could not believe what he had just heard. Several imperial officials began whispering among themselves in their alien language. Jake continued before anyone could interrupt him. "We reject your trade agreement. We reject your attempt to buy our silence with prosperity built on the blood of innocence. Instead, humanity formally demands that you cease all mass executions, release your political prisoners, and submit to investigation by an independent galactic tribunal for crimes against sentient life." The Emperor's scales turned deep red with rage. He rose from his throne like an avalanche of fury, his forearms gesturing wildly. "You dare make demands of me? You insignificant creature from a pathetic world that could be reduced to ash by a single Imperial battlecruiser?" Jake felt sweat running down his back, but he kept his voice steady. "I dare because someone must. I dare because those 50,000 people deserve better than to die for your entertainment." I dare because the galaxy deserves to know what kind of monster rules over them. Emperor of X-High began to laugh, the same grinding sound Jake had heard before. Monster? I am not a monster. Little human. I am evolution perfected. I am what the universe creates when the weak are allowed to perish and the strong are allowed to thrive. Your species will learn this lesson, though it will cost you everything. The Emperor gestured to his guards. Seize them. They will be executed. Publicly as an example to any species that might share their delusions of righteousness. But Jake was not finished. As the guards moved toward him, he activated a device hidden in his diplomatic case. Instantly, every screen in the throne room came alive with images and data, the execution footage, records of other Imperial atrocities, and evidence of the resistance movements across the galaxy. I'm afraid it's too late for that, Your Majesty, Jake said calmly. While we were talking, this evidence was being transmitted to every inhabited system in the galaxy. Your secret communications network has been compromised by human encryption technology. Every species under your rule now knows what you really are. The Emperor's rage turned his scales almost black. Impossible. Our security systems are impenetrable. Amy. Rodriguez stepped forward, speaking for the first time since entering the throne room. Your systems were designed to keep out alien technology. They weren't prepared for human innovation. We think differently than other species, approach problems from angles you never considered. On the screens around them, the execution footage played again and again. But now it was accompanied by data showing the scope of Imperial brutality. Hundreds of worlds where similar massacres had taken place. Millions of beings who had died simply for opposing tyranny. Jake activated another function on his device. The transmission includes more than just evidence of your crimes. It also contains a message to every resistance cell in the galaxy. The signal includes coordinates, timing information, and strategic data that our intelligence services have been gathering for months. Emperor of X-High realized what was happening just as alarms began sounding throughout the palace. His military commanders were receiving reports from across the Empire, simultaneous uprisings on dozens of worlds, coordinated attacks on Imperial facilities, and the destruction of key communication relays. You have triggered a rebellion that will consume the galaxy in war, the Emperor snarled. Jake nodded grimly. Better a war for freedom than peace built on mass murder. The Emperor raised one of his clawed hands to order Jake's immediate execution, but a new alarm interrupted him. Commander Steve Walsh's voice came through on an emergency frequency from the UES Liberty. Ambassador, we're detecting massive energy signatures throughout the Imperial fleet. It looks like they're preparing to destroy the planet's surface, including a capital city. Jake felt his blood run cold. The Emperor was willing to destroy his own capital rather than face a galaxy-wide rebellion. Millions of Imperial citizens would die along with the resistance fighters and diplomatic staff. But Jake had prepared for this possibility too. Commander Walsh, execute Protocol 7. Protocol 7 confirmed, Ambassador. Across the galaxy, hidden human ships that had been disguised as merchant vessels suddenly revealed their true nature. They activated military-grade shields and weapons, moving to protect the most important resistance leaders and civilian populations from Imperial retaliation. More importantly, they began broadcasting a message that Jake had recorded before leaving. Earth. His image appeared on screens throughout the galaxy, speaking directly to every sentient being who could receive the transmission. My name is Jake Morrison, and I speak for the people of Earth, his recorded voice said. Today, humanity takes a stand against tyranny and genocide. We call upon every free being in the galaxy to join us in fighting for justice and the right to live without fear. The message continued with specific instructions for resistance cells, offers of human technical assistance, and coordinates for supply drops and safe zones. It was a comprehensive plan for galaxy-wide rebellion that had been months in the making. Emperor Vex High watched his empire begin to crumble in real time as reports flooded in from his military commanders. Revolts were breaking out faster than they could be suppressed. Imperial facilities were being destroyed by saboteurs who had been waiting years for this moment. Most critically, several Imperial species were joining the rebellion, turning their knowledge of Imperial tactics against their former rulers. "You have doomed your species," the Emperor hissed at Jake. "Even if this rebellion succeeds, the cost will be billions of lives lost in war. The galaxy will burn because of your foolish idealism." Jake met the Emperor's gaze without flinching. "The galaxy is already burning, Your Majesty. You've been setting it on fire one world at a time for decades. The only difference is that now someone is fighting back." Security Chief Roy Palmer's voice crackled through Jake's communicator. "Ambassador, Imperial forces are moving to surround the palace. We need to extract you now if we're going to get out of here alive." But Jake shook his head. "Negative, Roy. If we run now, the Empire will claim this was all human treachery and aggression. I need to stay here and face whatever consequences come from our decision." Emperor Vex High's scales turned a deep, angry purple. "Very well, human. You wish to face consequences? You will be executed as a war criminal and enemy of the Imperial State. Your death will be broadcast across the galaxy as a warning to other would-be rebels." Jake straightened his diplomatic uniform and looked around the throne room at the assembled Imperial officials. Many of them were looking uncertain now, as if they were beginning to question whether their emperor's methods were sustainable in the face of galaxy-wide opposition. "Your Majesty," Jake said formally, "I am a diplomatic representative of Earth, and I am prepared to accept responsibility for my actions. But I want everyone in this room to understand something. This rebellion didn't start because humans wanted war. It started because we refused to ignore mass murder when it was happening right in front of us." The palace shook as explosions began going off in the city below. The rebellion on Zephyr Prime itself was beginning, as resistance cells that had been hidden for years finally revealed themselves and began attacking Imperial strongholds. Jake looked up at Emperor Vex High one last time. "You tested humanity to see what we would do when faced with your power." 3 years had passed since Jake Morrison stood in Emperor Vex High's throne room and triggered the greatest rebellion in galactic history. The war that followed had been brutal and costly, with battles fought on hundreds of worlds and casualties numbered in the millions. But now, as Jake stood on the observation deck of the Free Worlds Alliance flagship Humanity's Hope, he could see the end approaching. Below them, the last great Imperial fleet hung in space near the Nexus Prime system, surrounded by ships from dozens of different species. The Alliance had grown from Jake's desperate gambit into a true galactic government, united by their shared hatred of Imperial tyranny and their determination to build something better. Admiral Kate Bennett joined Jake at the viewing window, her hair now streaked with gray from 3 years of constant warfare. She wore the uniform of the Alliance Navy, with ribbons and medals from battles across the galaxy. Her expression was tired, but satisfied as she watched the Imperial ships slowly surrender. "It's almost over," she said quietly. Emperor Vex High's flagship just sent a surrender signal. The last of his loyal forces are laying down their weapons. Jake nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and sadness. The war had accomplished its goals. The Empire's genocide campaign had been stopped, millions of political prisoners had been freed, and dozens of species had regained their independence. But the cost had been enormous. Captain Linda Foster approached them with a report in her hands. She had commanded human forces in some of the war's most difficult battles, earning respect from alien allies who had initially doubted humanity's military capabilities. "Ambassador, we have confirmation from all sectors. Imperial resistance has collapsed. The war is officially over. The celebration that followed lasted for 3 days across hundreds of worlds. Species that had been enslaved for centuries danced. In their streets, while resistance fighters who had spent decades hiding in caves and underground tunnels finally emerged into sunlight. Children who had grown up knowing only Imperial oppression learned what freedom meant. But Jake found himself thinking about the price they had all paid. Dr. Carl Wright had died in the siege of Kepler Station, killed while treating wounded civilians. Lisa Grant had been captured during a raid on an Imperial communications center and executed before Alliance forces could rescue her. Roy Palmer had sacrificed himself to save a transport full of refugees from an Imperial attack. The human cost had been heavy, but it was nothing compared to what other species had suffered. The Vrextans had lost half their surviving population in the final battles. The Kelari homeworld had been destroyed by Imperial weapons in the war's second year. Entire civilizations had been wiped out by Emperor Vexhi's increasingly desperate attempts to maintain control. Jake walked through the corridors of his ship, past memorial walls covered with pictures of the dead. Human faces looked back at him, young soldiers who had volunteered to fight for alien freedom, diplomats who had died negotiating ceasefires, and scientists who had been killed while developing new technologies for the Alliance. He stopped at one picture in particular, his daughter Sarah, who had been killed in an Imperial bombing raid on Earth during the war's first year. She had been working in a hospital, treating wounded refugees when the attack came. Jake touched her photograph with trembling fingers, wondering if the freedom they had won was worth the price his family had paid. Amy Rodriguez found him there, standing quietly before his daughter's picture. She had become the Alliance's chief translator, helping dozens of species work together despite their different languages and cultures. The war had aged her, adding lines to her face and gray to her black hair, but her eyes still held the same determination Jake remembered from that first day in the Imperial Palace. She would be proud of what we accomplished, Amy said softly. Jake wiped tears from his eyes. Would she? Sometimes I wonder if I had the right to make decisions that would cost so many lives. Maybe we should have taken the Emperor's trade deal and found some other way to stop the killings. Amy shook her head firmly. Jake, you saw those execution recordings. The Emperor wasn't going to stop with 50,000 deaths. He was planning to kill millions, maybe billions, to maintain his power. The war was horrible, but it saved more lives than it cost. 2 weeks later, Jake stood in the newly constructed Galactic Justice Tribunal on the neutral world of Haven Prime. The chamber was designed to accommodate representatives from every known species, with different atmospheric zones and gravity fields to ensure everyone could participate comfortably. Emperor Vexhi sat in the defendant's chair, his once mighty form now looking old and defeated. His scales had turned a dull gray color, and his 4 arms were bound with energy restraints. Around him sat dozens of other Imperial officials who had been captured during the war's final battles. The evidence presented against them was overwhelming. Video recordings of mass executions, testimonies from survivors, documents showing the scope of the genocide campaign, and records of other Imperial atrocities dating back decades. Species after species told their stories of Imperial brutality, creating a picture of systematic oppression and murder that shocked even the tribunal judges. Jake served as the chief prosecutor, presenting humanity's case against the Empire. He spoke for 3 days, detailing every crime and atrocity that had been uncovered during the war. His voice remained steady and professional, but those who knew him could see the pain in his eyes as he described the suffering that had motivated humanity's rebellion. When it came time for Emperor Vexhi to speak in his own defense, the former ruler stood with as much dignity as his restraints allowed. His voice was weaker than Jake remembered, but it still carried the arrogance that had characterized his reign. I am guilty of nothing except being strong in a universe that rewards strength, he said. Every action I took was necessary to maintain order and prevent chaos. The weak deserve to perish so that the strong can thrive. This is the natural law of existence, and no tribunal of lesser beings can change that truth. The judges deliberated for 2 weeks before reaching their verdict. Chief Justice Zektar, a former Rextan resistance fighter who had visited Jake on Zephyr Prime, read the sentence in a voice that carried across the galaxy through live broadcasts. Emperor Vex High and his co-defendants are found guilty of genocide, crimes against sentient beings, and violations of the fundamental laws that govern civilized behavior in our galaxy. However, this tribunal chooses to demonstrate the moral superiority that the Empire lacked. Rather than execution, the defendants are sentenced to life imprisonment, where they will have time to contemplate the consequences of their actions. Jake felt a mixture of satisfaction and emptiness as the sentence was carried out. Justice had been served, but it could not bring back the dead or undo the suffering that had been caused. The real work began after the trials ended. The free worlds. Alliance faced the enormous task of rebuilding a galaxy that had been devastated by decades of imperial rule and 3 years of war. Entire star systems needed new governments. Refugee populations had to be resettled, and the economic systems that had depended on imperial trade routes had to be restructured. Jake found himself appointed as the Alliance's first Ambassador General, responsible for coordinating diplomatic relations between dozens of different species. It was exhausting work that required him to travel constantly between worlds, mediating disputes and negotiating agreements. But there were moments of hope that made all the effort worthwhile. Jake stood in the rebuilt city center of Kepler 442c, the mining world where the original 50,000 executions had taken place. Where once there had been an arena of death, now there was a memorial park with fountains and gardens where children of different species played together. The memorial wall bore the names of all 50,000 victims, carved in the languages of their home worlds. At the center stood a simple plaque with words that Jake had written. They died so that others might live free. Their sacrifice lit the flame of rebellion that burned across the galaxy and consumed tyranny forever. An elderly Vrextan woman approached Jake as he stood before the memorial. Her blue skin was wrinkled with age, and her forearms moved slowly as she walked. But her eyes were bright with gratitude. My grandson was among those who died here, she said in accented English. For 3 years, I hated the humans who started the war that killed so many more of my people. But today, watching my great-granddaughter play with human and Kalari children, I understand what you gave us. You gave us hope. You gave us a future where our children can grow up free. Jake knelt down to the woman's level, taking her hands in his. The price was too high, he said quietly. Too many good people died for this freedom. The old woman smiled. Sadly, young human, freedom has always been expensive. The only thing more expensive is slavery. You helped us pay the price for liberty so that our children would never have to pay the price for oppression. As the sun set over the memorial park, Jake watched human and alien children chasing each other around the fountains, their laughter echoing off the memorial walls. They spoke a mixture of languages, shared toys and games that came from different worlds, and treated each other's differences as sources of wonder rather than fear.